Good evening, everyone, and a warm welcome to the Expert Talk series. I'm Akil Rashid, Research and Knowledge Hub Chief at Jkpi. Uh, as all of you know, we have initiated the Expert Talk series to engage experts, change makers, pioneers from various walks of life to understand sustainable development goals on our agenda. The vision and intention of the Expert Talk series is to source inputs, recommendations from experts in various fields pertaining to different sustainable development goals through one-on-one dialogues. In our previous sessions of the Expert Talk series, our guest speakers discussed the topics gender equality in entrepreneurship and business and role of civil society organizations in achieving gender equality. Tonight, we are here to present the seventh session of the Expert Talk series on the theme gender equality, technology, and gender equality. The guest speaker you are about to listen to is the authority on the topic being covered tonight. Let's get on with it then and welcome Miss Anas Nepinai, Supreme Court advocate and founder of Cyber Sathi, who will be talking to us on the topic technology and gender equality. Ms. Nepinai is a senior and renowned lawyer since 1991, specializing in constitutional, criminal, IPR, and cyber laws. She is advisor Tamil Nadu e-governance agency with special focus on legal aspects of IPR, blockchain, and artificial intelligence. Ms. Nepinai is amicus curiae before Supreme Court in Prajawala versus Union of India to formulate methodologies to remove child sexual abuse material and violent videos of offenses against women from online platforms. She's also advisor Maharashtra Cyber Police. She was recently acknowledged by Cyber Police Peace Foundation, She the People .tv, and Security Today for her contributions in cyber laws. On behalf of the entire team of JKPI, I welcome you tonight, and I would like to thank all who are going to join and watch this positive and engaging discussion on technology and gender equality. Now, I would like to pass on the mantle to Tanveer Loon, our facilitator for the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Akhil. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you, Ms. Napinai, ma'am. Thank you once again for joining us here on the Expert Talk series. So, as you all are aware about the topic we're going to discuss tonight, so I will start with diversity and cybersecurity. So, first of all, a noticeable imbalance in the ratio of men to women is the first thing that comes in our mind when one talks of diversity. Cybersecurity and diversity are two symbiotic words, but are not often discussed together in common. Experts suggest that industry needs a cultural overhaul in the sense that women need to understand that they can stand shoulder to shoulder with their male counterparts. Okay, so back in 2013, a research firm, Frost and Sullivan, they produced data that only 11% of the global cybersecurity workforce has women employees, or we can say that 11% of the total workforce in the global cybersecurity comprised of women. But last year in 2020, again, a research firm with the name Cybersecurity Ventures, they did the research on the same topic, but there has been a slight increase now. The women make up 20% of the total global cybersecurity workforce now. So with in the contrast of 7 years, there has been an increase of 9% of the women in the workforce of this global cybersecurity. So it's also predicted by a firm that by the end of 2021, 3.5 million cybersecurity jobs will be left unfilled. Okay, now, as there have been multiple findings that highlight the lack of gender diversity within the field of cybersecurity and even the judiciary, I would like to learn from your experience, man, how the past 30 years have been, especially working on cyber laws, the legal aspects of blockchain, artificial intelligence, these IPR, as these are usually conceived as masculine professions.
Uh, Thank you for this question. Very interesting start to a discussion on equality or gender equality, I would say, or inclusiveness. Let me just take you back a little bit before IPR and cyber laws also. I have always been in what is perceived as a male dominated domain because I started practice as a criminal lawyer. You know, in my time, it was unheard of for women to choose criminal law. And I cannot tell you the number of times and the number of people who tried to dissuade me from taking up criminal law. And I had a very simple reason for sticking on to criminal law, which was that I did law to practice criminal law. So it was not just a choice of convenience, it was a choice of passion. So every field that I have chosen thereafter has been a choice of passion, be it intellectual property rights. Again, in 91, it was something very seminal. It was a sunrise sector when I started practice, and for somebody to take that up was not the norm, you know. So again, it was a choice which was purely based out of interest, and it was because of my work in IPR that I landed up in cyber laws too. Again, passion, nothing else. You know, intrigue, interest, and passion. So I always keep telling people, one, we can't keep thinking about gender as if it has a role to play in whatever we decide to do. Everybody who has broken stereotypes did it because they didn't give it much thought, not because they consciously thought that here we are, we're going to be pioneers, we are going to go and, you know, become path breakers for others to follow, etc. They did it because they love doing what they did. I'm exactly like that. I didn't choose criminal law because I thought I would be a woman who would stand out in the crowd. I didn't choose IPR because of gender, and I certainly didn't choose cyber laws because of my gender. In the eyes of people, possibly there may have been some level of gender or a gendered view rather, because, you know, I'll tell you one anecdote, especially because you talked about blockchain and AI, etc. Again, cyber laws is an evolving field, so you need to keep upskilling and updating yourself continuously, and being part of the emerging technology scenario also is part of this upskilling. I was literally one of the first to start speaking about blockchain independent of cryptocurrencies, and I was probably that was probably the first session ever which was also held on cryptocurrencies by Asucham, because they wanted to create clarity in terms of the legal scenario on it. And I remember after I finished my session, one of the participants during the lunch break shared with me, and in all fairness, he actually thought he was complimenting me. Okay, and he says, you know, when you walked in, I thought here is a woman, and a sari clad woman at that, and who's come to speak about cryptocurrency and blockchain. What is she going to know about it? And then after hearing you, I realized you probably know more than all of us put together on both blockchain as well as cryptocurrency. So, you know, this stereotyping just based on how you look or which gender you belong to, I, I feel is more an individual centric thing. It's not really an industry driven thought. So, if I'm giving some inputs to all the women out there, cybersecurity is so easy to adapt without thinking about gender. Think about all those people. I still remember hearing this one lady who was the first woman in that company to go on the factory floor. And the first problem she had was there was no ladies' toilet because they never had ladies on the factory floor. So those are physical hardships you face in a male dominated scenario. Whereas technology is not like that. There are literally no barriers. So this is my take always for not just women, for people in general. Law is one such thing because it's all cerebral. How does it matter whether you're male or female when you're in law? Because what matters is how your thought processes work, how much hard work you're willing to put in, how much of upskilling you're willing to do all the time, right? So you just have to keep studying and learning. And that's why we call it practice. We never say we are perfect, right? As lawyers, that is. And similarly, cybersecurity is a field like that. It's cerebral. So here is an opportunity for women, and here is the opportunity for leveling the playing field. So we should all be out there and break more stereotypes on this.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, you rightly pointed out that diversity is not limited to gender only. So it's a combination of backgrounds, education, skills, and experience, plus thought process. So the absence of one of the elements in the industry can prove to be completely fruitless. Okay, so I'm moving on to the Cyber Sati, the initiative by you. So what was the idea behind establishing Cyber Sati?
Well, I should thank, this is the positive side of COVID lockdown, because Cyber Sati was conceptualized by me in about 2016. Sometimes, when we are on the treadmill of our career paths, we sometimes tend to miss the trees for the forest, right? So I was in UK for my evening fellowship, and some of these fellowships I really welcome because one, it gives you a pause to think and to evolve, and also you get to meet different kinds of people from different parts of the world and also from diverse fields. So here was this opportunity for me to take a break from my crazy routines. And then I realized that as a practitioner, I've been in multiple, I've worn many hats, right? One is as a specialist in practicing cyber laws, as an advocate. The other was in capacity building for judges, police, and all that from, years back. I think one of the first I did for police, police were the first to adapt, for capacity building. That was in 2003. And then I think from 2004 or 5, I've started training judges also in this field. So there was this capacity building process. And the last bit was my work in policy making. So I wanted to bring all of these together, coalesce it into a whole, and give it structure as an organization instead of an individualistic effort. So if you look at Cyber Sati and how it works top down and bottoms up, both ways. The top-down approach is as the think tank, or the think-do tank, as we call it nowadays, because we don't just involve ourselves in research, but in actually implementing it. So the primary focus is to help in the evolution of policy making and law making from top down and bottoms up, and that is something very close to my heart. That was the first thought, and that's why the name Cyber Sati, which is that every time, be it in my criminal law practice or in handling cybercrime matters, that which I've noticed with every single case is whenever somebody is in trouble, you could be in trouble because you're the victim, or you could be in trouble because you suddenly had that eureka moment that you have actually committed a crime. It actually works both ways, You first reach out to a friend. You don't reach out to an authority figure. You certainly don't reach out to parents or to adults. You reach out to a friend. It may be incidental that that friend may be an adult parent, etc. So that's why the name Cyber Sati or Cyber Friend. And the other thing which I decided to do was, what I realized was that when you reach out to your friend, chances are your friend may not be the right person to advise you for the correct course of action, because they may be ignorant also. So the whole idea of Cyber Sati's, bottom of the pyramid work is to ensure awareness about cyber laws, cyber crime trends, and what are the legal remedies available and how do you get them? Because everybody is scared of law, everybody is scared of courts, everybody is certainly scared of police. They think, filing a complaint or taking up legal recourse is a larger problem than the offense itself. So as many times I noticed that victims tend to fall prey to more crimes because of their reluctance to take help. So the whole idea of Cyber Sati was to ensure awareness about these three aspects, about what are the trends in crimes, so that one, you can protect yourself and not fall victim, but also from the perspective that you should not inadvertently end up committing a crime. The latter part becomes much more important because the people who are using technology are the youngsters, the millennials. So we are a young nation. India is a young nation, and we don't want a nation of criminals. We are not out to criminalize the youngsters. It's better that we guide them up front. So therefore, Cyber Sati focuses a lot on the other side of it also, which is to ensure that you don't inadvertently commit a crime. And two, to encourage victims to seek recourse through law and not to keep quiet or silent, because when a victim keeps silent, they will be victimized further, and their silence is emboldening a criminal because everybody online thinks they are invisible. They don't realize that they can be tracked, they can be traced, and they can be punished. So it's important for that message to go out, also to give courage to victims to file complaints so that criminals can be prosecuted. Unless that happens, we will not see a reduction on the pandemic. The shadow pandemic that has been happening during COVID has also been this exponential increase in cyber crimes. So it's really important for us to send the right message out. And to help victims do that, I set up cybersati.org, the website. See, one thing I've realized when I've worked with the police is that telephone helplines are near impossible to man. If a government can't do it, a private entity cannot certainly do that. So what I did was I decided that this will be the online helpline. So cybersati.org is meant to be a kind of online helpline, which is why I also conceptualized this very unique homepage, which is nothing but a query box to say that we are here to help you, you're not alone. And when every time somebody writes in, at least we try to give them the first responder help. We don't give legal advice because that's next to impossible again to sustain long term. So what we do is we give first responder help in terms of guiding them to show them that they do have legal remedies under law and how to get that, the procedural aspect of it. So these are the two spectrums, ends of the spectrum of work that Cyber Sati does. And this was the vision and mission with which it was created.
That's really nice to hear about Cyber Sati. Sorry for interruption. That's really nice to hear about Cyber Sati. So for sure, it will be a voice to those people who wish to remain silent. And you, as you rightly pointed, that remaining silent is again a problem. So, ma'am, you have been providing training and capacity building programs in cyber laws. How do you ensure gender-sensitive capacity building?
Tanvir, your first question, I think I answered in part. I talked about the gender equality aspect in cyber security. Your second part of the question dealt with equality or gender inclusiveness in the judiciary. I think in a way, the second part links to your current question. And believe me, I have at no point of time really thought about myself as a girl, woman, lady, or gendered. It's about just being human. We are all human beings and we are all equals, and we just have to get on with life based on what our interests are. That's the way my upbringing has been, and it's strange because I come from a large family, predominantly male. Including my brothers, everything. But still, we grew up in an environment where we never thought gender. So I did my work also without really thinking gender. And when it comes to addressing sessions, there are two things which I've always emphasized on, and I try very hard to ensure that the message goes through. And I'm really thankful for all the opportunity I've got through various judicial academies and police academies to carry forward this message. Especially when I speak to police, I emphasize the importance of human rights and rule of law. Because, sometimes we tend to forget why we exist. Police have inherited a colonial past, and it's important for them to break away from that. And therefore, I feel that this emphasis of making them understand and helping them to break out of stereotypes and to understand how to apply the law is very important. And yes, in my judicial capacity building processes, I've actually been part of some sessions which spoke about the sensitization aspect. One of the earliest exercises I took up was actually not part of cyber law, but a standalone exercise on first studying what was the level of gender sensitivity amongst judiciary, and I'm talking about 1995, okay? And then applying that study to practical purposes. So thankfully, this consciousness that there is a lack of gender sensitivity in the judiciary helped in integrating these messages into the topic. So I'll give a simple example. When we talk about things like, revenge porn, as it is colloquially called, I prefer to use cyber extortion, right? Where people may be using, for instance, morphed pictures. So when it is the nude photograph or videos of a woman, everybody immediately reacts and says, this is so wrong, it has to be stifled, right? This kind of a crime should be nipped at the bud. But when it comes to morphed pictures, there is a sense of assumption that it's a victimless crime, that nobody has been affected. This is the same issue with cyberbullying also. So I handled this one case where it was about, the group was in a social media platform, and the crime happened in the process of so-called a group which is so-called into the satirical part of things, right? So in the guise of satire, threats are literally put out to women, because this was during the Me Too movement, when the women participants had started talking about Me Too and the victims, and about how social media is a sound platform for these kind of issues to be brought out. The women who started talking and the women who supported the persons who were speaking about it were subjected to first ridicule and then threats. The threats went on to the extent of almost saying, I know where you live kind of thing, and we know what we want to do to you kind of things, right? And yet when the case came up in the first instance, the automatic reaction, and you have to remember, gender sensitivity or gender disparity is not a male issue. It's, it would be very wrong for you to assume that all the male members of a judiciary will be anti-women. All women are going to be pro-women, okay, or pro-gender. It's really wrong, because again, as I said about other things, the concept of gender is a very cerebral thing. It's all in your mind in terms of how you approach gender, whichever gender it may be. We don't necessarily have to speak binary here too. So prejudices may actually be with the lady judges too, as much as or more so than even the male judges. So it's really important to identify and to address it so that they understand in a very peaceable manner that these are not victimless crimes, but there are the victims suffer serious harm. So I gave you one example in terms of women. Let me give you another example which shocks my conscience when I'm even opening my mouth to talk about it. A series of cases came up before US courts, okay, at the lower judiciary, and it took the appellate court for them to remedy this mistake, where child sexual abuse content, which was being circulated online, was considered a victimless crime. So these judgments had to be overturned by the appellate court to say that sharing of CSAM is not a victimless crime. It's a very serious and zero tolerance offense. So the reason I'm pointing out to these two things is you will realize that when it comes to the virtual world, somehow people seem to think that it is disassociated, right? And this is something which I've written about in my book, in my articles, and I've spoken about extensively. Victims have this disinhibition theory, or Suler calls it a disinhibition theory. Victims have it, perpetrators have it, and Suler calls it toxic disinhibition. I call it disassociation in my book because it's not just about dropping your inhibition. It is also like, in Lady Macbeth and that soliloquy where she talks about the blood on her hand kind of thing. In fact, I use it as an example in my book to show how when a crime is committed, you think it is distanced from you. And the soliloquy is actually a reversal where the Lady Macbeth doesn't commit the crime, but later on in her dreams, she starts dreaming of the blood in her hand, And I use the example to say that in a similar fashion, or in a reversal of role, so to say, criminals online think that no crime is being committed because of this disassociation of a digital divide. And some of them hopefully maybe later on realize, like Lady Macbeth, that there is certainly blood on their hand. So these are all the issues that need to come out when it comes to the virtual world, to make every stakeholder, be it police, be it judiciary, be it prosecutors, or for that matter, you will be amazed, defense lawyers also. It's really important for all to know that these are not victimless crimes. There is something called as a gendered crime online, and that there has to be sensitivity in handling these kind of cases. So the outcome, is it just talk, right? It's not always just talk. You can actually bring about change at a granular level once you know about the issues or concerns of the domain. So finally, and very quickly, one example. So you have these cases of revenge porn where, consensually recorded content is then wrongfully or illegally shared by one party without the consent of the other online, just to get back at them when a relationship breaks, or when threats do not function any longer, etc. Or it could be a case of morphing. Most times, victims are very scared that their imagery will be looked at by others, or it will get leaked out into the press, etc. That is their biggest fear. So they don't even want to prosecute because of that. So here is a lesson for them. In one of the cases which I handled, I was able to get a sealing order in the very first hearing. I was appearing for the victim, and when you appear for the victim, you appear as assisting prosecution. So you don't have a right to appear directly. The state is the complainant, so they will be, the prosecutor will be appearing for the state, but you will appear for the victim to assist prosecution. Even in such a limited role, I was able to explain to court the gendered aspect of how a woman victim would feel. And on the very first hearing, we were able to seal the content. We were also able to argue, and successfully so, that the copy should not be furnished to the accused. The accused lawyer can come and see, and it's called a search, and it's a technical term, but effectively the dissemination of this content to various people and the possibility of shaming the victim further was stifled. And this was only a case of morphing and not even the nude photographs of the victim. So if you apply yourself, if you apply the gender lens, you can find solutions, and courts are very, very open to these kind of evolving constructs. So it's just up to us to ensure that we find the remedies properly.
And you rightly pointed out the virtual world. So how to ensure safe and secure digital spaces for various gendered groups? How can it serve as a tool of empowerment for them?
So I always believe that knowledge is power. If you know, then chances are that you will learn how to protect yourself. And I also, I have a child in me, both in terms of inquisitiveness and also probably the rebel. You tell me not to do something, I will 100% do it. I'm like that, right? So I also therefore understand the child or a young adult psyche in that sense. So I don't believe in giving them do's and don'ts lists. We can give them guidance or pointers in terms of cyber safety, cyber hygiene, etc. But merely because you've said so, don't expect the millennial to listen to you. I know most of you or all of you are millennials in this group, and I'm sure you will resonate with this thought. But the whole idea again behind Cyber Sati was this: don't preach, don't teach, just share. And that's all I wanted to do. The first stage was, with all the learning that I have in terms of handling cybercrime cases, in terms of teaching, and also interacting with judiciary, police, and hearing stories from them of the kind of cases that come up. The whole idea was to share through storytelling how the scenario will pan out. Just tell people, if you do this, this may be an outcome. If somebody calls you and asks you for your one-time password and you share it, chances are your bank account will be wiped out, right? If you go online, create an anonymous account and bully somebody, chances are you will be traced and you will be prosecuted. Once you're prosecuted and once you've been undergone a jail term, you've been punished, then this is what can happen going forward with your life. So you share these stories and say, if you share, you're going to get adventurous, because we have armed ourselves with this very, very powerful tool, this one. We don't just have a mobile. We armed ourselves with this camera, and we armed every child with it too, right? But we didn't provide them with the manual to keep themselves safe from this kind of such a serious weapon. You gave them an opportunity, they will experiment. You can't stop them. You can't give them something, and you can't give them a sweet and say, don't eat it, right? This having the cake and eat it too has never made sense to me. Why else would you have the cake, right? So that's the way every child is going to think, or an adult is going, young adult is going to think. So if they've gotten adventurous, they decide to record certain things or take photographs of private moments, explaining to them about cases that this can happen. And you will be surprised, some of the reported judgments in terms of extortion are of photographs or videos taken by husband and wife of their private moments, where the husband then threatened the wife of distributing it online, and in many instances went ahead and distributed it online. And the courts very clearly clarified that it is indeed a criminal offense. Merely because you have the relationship of husband and wife, you do not have the right to disseminate like that. And merely because the wife agreed to recording of such content does not amount to consent for disseminating online. And therefore the husbands were punished. So you also have cases coming out like this. So when you share these kind of stories, chances are people are intelligent enough to take their decisions. They know the outcome, therefore they will figure out their solutions. Of course, we also try to provide the solutions, the legal remedies, but it's not just about legal remedies, right? It's more about prevention. And this is what Cyber Sati tries to do.
So, ma'am, you described it very beautifully. And one term which I liked is cyber hygiene. We can, I think, add it to the dictionary. It will be of good work, I guess, for one and all. So before we move ahead, I have with us our director at Jkpi, Ms. Sohini. She wants to ask a question.
Yes, I'll take it on from here, Tanveer. So, ma'am, I was just inquisitive. Inquisitive about one particular aspect. These days, during COVID-19, we see a lot of hate speech on the internet. And we see that it often targets certain groups and communities, and it's almost as if it's like an open battleground. And there seems to be no particular rule for Facebook flagging some content or some other platform flagging some content or the other. And most people are not clear about any kind of cyber law that could be applicable in the in our, say, Indian context. I mean, where the internet makes everything seemingly borderless. Where do we draw that boundary when it comes to hate speech and when it comes to this kind of incitement to violence or disruption? The whole anonymity element which the internet actually provides and the distancing leads to sometimes such spiraling of fake news and a lot of conversations around fake news. It can explode, and we've seen that happen a number of times. Then there are people in campaigns, things go viral, and then there is a certain amount of trauma related to it, linked to it, which is not taken into account when such things are happening, and it gets very difficult to control things or manage things. Now, in that respect, with your expertise in cyber law, how well prepared do you think we are as a country, or even in terms of the entire world, and how hate speech is such a huge deal these days? How prepared do you think we are to actually somehow monitor the cyberspace to be able to control or even build preventive capacity so that there is a reduction in the kind of hate speech that is all over the internet? Your comments on that, please, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for this. And it's very, very important. So one of my, actually, there are two articles which I've written recently, which may be of relevance for you. One is for She the People TV in terms of gendered crimes, and another much more in-depth research piece for IT for Change, which is on misogyny, hate speech, and the laws, and victim rights. So the focus there was on all these aspects which I've addressed today, also of how it's very important for law to now evolve to deal with or to combat or to ensure victim rights. Because predominantly, if you see the way law has evolved so far, naturally, and I agree that it is an important aspect of human rights protection, so that, we have this, 100 people may be let free, but an innocent should not be punished. Important, but we should still be mindful of victim rights. So on that note, one, there is a misconception. So here is another reason why Cyber Sati was started. I have heard even professionals make this mistake of thinking that a lot of crimes, we spoke a lot about revenge porn, right? And I've heard people, professionals, say there is no provision to combat revenge porn. It is so wrong, because you have laws for every possible kind of crime. All you need to do is dig deeper to find out how and in what manner a crime is committed. Then you will be able to find the applicable provision. So here, for hate speech, you can't only look at the Information Technology Act of 2000 for your remedies when you're talking about cyber crimes. Merely because you've added a prefix cyber, it doesn't mean that only this law applies. It is still a crime, right? You need to look beyond the IT Act, and if you look at it, you'll realize that you have a specific provision for hate speech under the Indian Penal Code already. And that has been applied in many cases where there has been very strident hate speech online. And you have this provision, 153A, if I'm not mistaken, which has been already applied. A very interesting case in this regard is actually from the Madras High Court, where a former comedian turned, I think, politician or what, I don't know, but I certainly know that he's a former comedian. He had retweeted a tweet about prostitutes, etc. When there was this huge thing, online hate speech about women journalists, etc. So the whole defense was that he had only retweeted and whatever. But the interesting part is there were 23 intervention applications from various organizations and people. And in that, this provision was applied and his anticipatory bail application was rejected. So you have a lot of instances already where these provisions have been applied. Two, you mentioned about anonymity online, and that's why I use that example, that merely because you set up an anonymous account and bully somebody, do not assume you cannot be tracked. You can be tracked. In fact, there is a lot of dissonance with this recent change to the intermediary guidelines that came out in 2021. One of the requirements under that is of deciding the first originator. And the reason for this is hate speech and fake news. Because there is an assumption that fake news particularly, and these are two different kinds of crimes. They're not, in some instances it may be interlinked, but not always. Yeah. So when it comes to fake news, the assumption that the government is working on is that it is being done on purpose. And therefore they want to be able to track the originator. There are a lot of legal issues involved in that, in terms of whether it's permissible or not. What are your privacy rights that are violated because of that? And to what extent are we giving out more power than is warranted in terms of a private entity tracing you all the time? Then you're like in a panopticon of surveillance all the time, right? So these are all other issues. But for the limited purpose of understanding that people can be tracked, again, I'm going to use a specific example here. When we come to chat apps, be it today, thanks to the issues that we have with the privacy policy of WhatsApp, it could be WhatsApp, it could be Signal, Telegram, anything. Everything talks about end-to-end encryption. So when somebody commits a crime through a chat app, they seem to somehow be under this misapprehension that because it's end-to-end encrypted, they can say or do whatever they want. So child sexual abuse content is being shared because they think it's safe. It is not. The transmission may be end-to-end encrypted, but you can still be tracked and traced. So it's not like people can get away with it. It depends on the sophistication of the crime also. And what I have seen is 90% of crimes are not that sophisticated or thought out. When we are talking about national security threats, that stands on a different level of sophistication. And there are also different levels of tools to combat that. When you're talking about day-to-day crimes against individuals, against businesses, then the crimes are not so majorly engineered that you cannot find them. Yeah? So victims have to take recourse under law and trust the systems to work, because if they don't do it, the systems will naturally atrophy and die. And that's what is happening now. COVID saw an exponential growth in crimes, mostly financial crimes, and also hate speech and fake news particularly. And most people were not coming out with the complaints. Look at the NCRB statistics in terms of how many crimes are being registered as opposed to how many crimes are being reported. So we need to come out with it. And finally, to close out, there are so many cases of a person threatening 3,000 to kill 3,000 of a particular religious order, and he was booked as a cyber terrorist, not just for hate speech, but as a cyber terrorist. There is a provision under the IT Act for cyber terrorism too, right? There was another instance where, even a hoax call can be booked under either hate speech or cyber terrorism, because it depends on what and how you structure your threat. And finally, the Law Commission has also advised or suggested inclusion of gender as a category for hate speech. It has not yet been included in the provision I just mentioned, but we can possibly look at some changes going forward.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That answers all my questions, and also those questions that were coming up while I was listening to you. So I will hand it over to Tanveer again for any further questions that he may have.
Thank you, Sonia. So moving back on to Cyber Sati also aims towards a stronger digital India. What recommendations would you offer to mainstream gender analysis in policymaking?
So the first thing I believe is that policymakers have to understand that there is indeed a gender lens. and that this gender lens is not just about victims. It's about inclusiveness in terms of every aspect of cyber. So be it in terms of, and I personally feel that there has not been any major uh, obstacles or stumbling blocks in accepting women in law in terms of cyber. It may or may not be the same in cybersecurity, but again, I have not seen this kind of discrimination in that. Two, when it comes to lawmaking, we have to understand that there is a softer target when it comes to women and children. It's not just women and children. I really believe that we have to start thinking gender and not just women. Because some of the cases that I've handled and come across clearly indicate that, LGBTQ are much more softer targets than even possibly women. It was worse before the 377 strike down, but now it's not like it has reduced, the risks and threats involved. It's not as if it is reduced now post the Supreme Court's decision on that. So we need to keep this in mind. We need to be mindful of the fact that we need customized remedies. So I'll give one simple example for this. This may also address Sohini's question, earlier in terms of hate speech and fake news. And it was such a simple remedy. Once the remedy is out, it always sounds so simple, right? So when you mentioned about this amicus brief that I'm handling, right? And that case not primarily, it actually deals with only two issues online. One is CSAM or child sexual abuse material online. And the other is violent videos of women, like, rape and gang rape videos online. So the issue arose because when the victims wrote to the platforms, there was no takedown of such heinous content like rape and gang rape videos. So when the NGO Prajwala wrote to the Chief Justice of India, the letter was converted into a suo motu criminal writ petition. And that's how the case commenced in 2015. I was appointed as amicus in February 2017. Now, the first issue that came up was, it's obviously criminal, the content. Why would a platform not take down actual rape and gang rape videos? And then you realize that the button that is available for reporting in most of the platforms is generic. So you first have to go to and I'm just giving this as a hypothetical situation because there are so many platforms we were dealing with, and each platform had a different architecture which we had to address in terms of court processes. So for instance, you have a link which allows you to report, and it says nudity. You go into nudity and there'll be 4 different categories or possibly none, right? And for nudity, even in India, we have now evolved from what we used to call the Hicklin's test of Lady Chatterley's lover. If you read it now, in the context of the kind of content we read now, you will find it hilarious that that was the threshold to decide obscenity, But we've moved away from the Hicklin's test now to what is called as community standards. So in today's community, what would amount to obscenity or not is what matters, right? So when it is only a button which says nudity, then naturally there is an automated response maybe, or there is not much scope for human intervention to see what is the nudity and why it should be taken down. So you get an automated response saying this doesn't meet our community standards. If rape and gang rape videos don't meet community standards, then what does? So the first thing we introduced as a consensus proposal was for the buttons to be modified for better reporting. So the minute you had specific buttons for child abuse content, the minute you had specific buttons for rape and gang rape or violent videos against women, then automatically takedowns became faster. So similarly, we need to just find simple solutions. Our solutions may not always be about running to court or filing cases or going to police and filing complaints. 90% of the time, victims just want to be protected from further vilification online. So takedowns are one of the most powerful tools, and the intermediary guidelines of 2021 now provides another remedy also of a 24-hour takedown through a nodal officer. So these are all options which are the non-adversarial kind. One, for platforms to evolve specific buttons, which can then help them to take down faster because they can review only that much, right? So, and the other is to take recourse of these kind of non-adversarial remedies that are now available in law.
Very useful ideas, which will for sure be beneficial in terms of curbing this child pornography, etc. So, ma'am, people of different genders also participate unequally in the formation and enactment of cybersecurity policies and practices. So, based on your experience, what have been your observations? How can we ensure equal participation, and how will it positively impact norm creation?
So, I have seen a lot of diverse participation when programs are organized by non-profits, like all of us, like a Cyber Sati or a Jkpi. But what we really need is the same kind of diversity and inclusiveness when it is a public consultation or a committee or anything, at the top level. We don't need salutary additions. It's not about showing, oh, we too have a woman. I'm sorry, with due apologies to the script writer and the producer of the movie Lagan, but I found it hilarious because it was almost like everybody had to be given one representation there, right? In the team of 11 or 12, whichever they had in Lagan. So similarly, we talk about salutary additions today when it comes to a committee, even when we talk about women in judiciary or in constitutional posts or in other things, we are still talking, we are 74 years down the line, we are still talking about involvement and equality. When are we going to get down to diversity and gender inclusiveness without thinking binary, right? Once you bring in diversity, not for the sake of it, not as some kind of a figurehead, but people who can bring in alternate thought processes, involving people without really overthinking the gender aspect is what I mean, but ensuring that it is there, participation and representation. Chances are these kind of simple remedies, which can be, sometimes we overthink things and we think that a complicated process is what will help. And that's what results in a law being struck down. Like 66A in IT Act, it was meant to curb a lot of different kinds of offenses. Bottom line, they cast the net wide and they said, oh, we will decide later whether you've committed a crime or not. And that's not permissible in criminal jurisprudence. So you need simple solutions. You need to involve diverse people in consultations or in committees and at a starting level as well as mid and last level, so that the outcome reflects simple, workable solutions which will address the actual problems that various communities face. That's the way we'll have to look at it. Even if it is a salutary addition, it is for the person who has been added through that salutary process to ensure they make a difference. And that is my hope on that front.
Now, it's really a misfortune that we are having only 1 hour to talk with you. As my colleague, Mr. Gyasa, already said that 1 hour is never going to be enough. So, ma'am, briefly, before we move ahead, can you please take us through the book Technology Laws Decoded, sorry.
Sure,
Just a brief summary.
Yes. Thank you so much for that question too. So again, this was something I should have done a long time back, but I was just so caught up with so many other things I was doing. But I'm glad I still delayed my book because I brought in all my experience from various perspectives and fields to share again. So the whole idea behind Technology Laws Decoded was to democratize cyber. Because, I come from a traditional practice field of criminal law to then a sunrise sector of IPR and then cyber, right? What I noticed was progressively in criminal law, it's not like 5 people practice criminal law. It was a very robust field of law. Similarly, in IPR, though a few of us started, it became very robust and it became very widespread very quickly. Whereas when it comes to cyber law and cyber crimes, I realized that there is a very small group continuously, dealing with the same things. You needed diversity, you needed more people to come into this field. And that was my whole idea. And therefore, and I call it my cyber law jigsaw, okay? Because when you talk about practitioners coming into this field, again, there was very little understanding in them where they didn't realize that cyber laws is not just about Information Technology Act, it goes way beyond that. And therefore, it was too important for awareness to be created on how this jigsaw work, where will you find all those pieces. So I structured Technology Laws Decoded into 7 chapters. It starts off with my favorite, constitutional law and tech, and then moves on to cyber crimes, IPR and cyber laws, contracts and cyber laws. You know, the Information Technology Act was enacted to enable e-commerce. So its very existence was about contract. And unfortunately, that has been completely overshadowed because of cyber crimes and whatever. So it was important to bring in focus on that. And the other thing which I saw was there was very little awareness or understanding and nothing written on procedural aspects. So 2 chapters were, technically 3 actually, chapters were dedicated to procedural aspects, which is on electronic evidence and jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is something that nobody has written about. You will find it in Technology Laws Decoded, and it covers both civil, criminal, arbitration, everything. And also, the book comprises case laws from all over the world. It covers laws of, for everything I did a comparative study, because the whole idea of Technology Laws Decoded was that it will pave the way for the future of cyber laws in India. And it's not just for India. The last chapter of Technology Laws Decoded speaks about international enforcement mechanisms, where I know people have told me that it's a very utopian dream, but I have advocated the need for a non-sovereign because 90% of cyber crimes are cross-border. All cyber crimes which impact national security are 100% cross-border and multi-jurisdictional. So who bells the cat? It brings us back to Soni's question earlier of how do you decide jurisdiction, right? Who will bell the cat? Who will initiate prosecution? How are you going to bring the criminals to meet that prosecution? So it's important for you to have an apex body similar to UN or something under UN to ensure that nation states can be equally protected as we want businesses or individuals to be protected. So that's the last chapter, which is very international flavored of Technology Laws Decoded. So another small story on this aspect, So I wrote the book, it was launched in March 2017. So I think about 6 months later or something, a committee which was formed to deal with suggestions for changes to electronic evidence, they reached out to me. And this gentleman who was part of the committee very cutely told me, where were you hiding all this while? I loved your book, and it's like, it's like my Bible in terms of cyber laws. And I was reading the electronic evidence part, and we have now had some 3-4 meetings, and we were breaking our head in terms of figuring out how to bring about these changes. What are the suggestions we should put in based on your book? And then the penny dropped, and I realized I can just call you. Why should I break my head over it? And then within just 2 meetings, we actually, I put together my suggestions, and it was captured in a report and we put it in. But I was so excited when this happened, because for me, that was validation in terms of why I wrote the book, of ensuring that there will be a guiding note for future of cyber laws for India. And here was this opportunity to contribute through the book and also physically. So I was very thrilled about this outcome. So I feel that a lot of things which I had in mind when I wrote Technology Laws Decoded have come to fruition. We are at this last mile in terms of actual changes being brought about to India's cyber laws, but we are on the threshold of it. So fingers crossed on that. I'm sure there'll be a lot more exciting things happening. And I'm sure, or I hope, that these inspired me to write a lot more. As I was telling Sohini earlier, I should have come out with a few more books already, but for some reason, I've been delaying it. Hopefully 2021 will see a lot more coming out, particularly on emerging technologies.
Thank you so much, ma'am. For sure, I'll advocate to all these friends who are practicing law, and even to all of us. We'll go through this book. So as we are running out of time, we had a few questions, but we'll mail those questions to you because we don't have that much time here. So before Sohini ma'am comes up with vote of thanks, I have my colleague, Mr. Akil, who wants to say a few words. Mr. Akil, up to you.
Thank you, Tanveer, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ms. Nipenai, for delivering very interesting and useful, giving us some insights to cyber laws and the technology, online technology. As my colleagues Jigyasa and Tanveer rightly pointed out, that 1 hour wasn't enough to make most of the experiences and knowledge that you possess on cyber laws and online technology. But nevertheless, it was enough to encourage people to highlight cyber crimes and discourage those who are indulging in online crimes. It was, and also it was enough to show that there is a hope of getting justice if someone has been a victim of online abuse or harassment, and that everyone can understand and comprehend cyber laws and benefit from them. And with this, I thank you very much for sparing your precious time and providing us enlightening insights to increase our understanding of technology and gender equality. I wish you all the best for the future. Now I would like Ms. Sohini to present the vote of thanks. Over to you, Sohini. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Akil. Thank you, ma'am. Needless to say, it has been a riveting 1 hour session. I mean, we couldn't, we were hanging on to every single word, and it's a lot of information. I mean, I don't think that most of us are this aware about the digital space, but we are using it every day. It's become a lifestyle. And we don't know the threats, we don't know the modalities for getting justice. And we definitely are not aware of all those all the thought that goes behind building something like an ethical framework for the digital space. And for someone like you who's been a pioneer to be building that and aiding the development and evolution of that, it's an absolute honor to have you with us in this humble initiative. We would definitely wish to keep in touch and reach out to you, because as a think and do tank, as you rightly put it, we are a bunch of young people who are aspirational in trying to bring in new ideas and new thoughts and frameworks to redefine the way we look at development in Jammu and Kashmir. So that's just something we would want to please have the opportunity to reach out to you. I know you're very, very busy, but we're also very grateful that you took the time to be here with us. Your book, Technology Laws Decoded, is definitely on our list, and I would recommend that to every person who is tuned in, because awareness is one thing that we can gift ourselves in this digital age. And ma'am, one suggestion, maybe you should take to more blogging or podcasting. That would actually be great for a storyteller like you and someone who uses digital technology to reach more young people. Because believe me, today's session was something that was an eye-opener, not to mention it is bringing up so many different research questions that we can work on, so many gaps and so many things which we can address later on. So having said that, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for giving us so much of information, for sharing so generously. And of course, for the incredible work that you're doing in today's time when we're going through this COVID lockdown. Everyone can testify to the importance of your work. I mean, there are times when initially, when you rightly said that you had a low profile and you started out in a field which was where people were dissuading you, people didn't understand the importance of it. But given time and right now, the kind of situation we are facing and everything that we are seeing, it is people like you that we all look up to for support, for help, and for guidance. So thank you so much for contributing every single day to making our digital places safe and for helping guide generations for a safer future. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you, everyone,
Thank
for
you all
tuning
for
in.
having me here.
Sony,
It's been a
before
pleasure and honor to address you in this session.
Yes, Akhil?
I wanted Tausif to end the live session on if he can, so we can have some